What I'm going to be giving you are some general guidelines on the way you should be thinking about writing project proposals, whether it's Horizon 2020 or even a simple project with money from the ministry. Because what I'm going to be talking about are aspects of the philosophy. It's your strategy. Again, I'm trying to avoid biting my tongue. It's a difficult word to say that, strategy, without biting my tongue. It's your strategy to make sure that your proposal is the best, that it comes up at the top of the list. So, I'm going to be focusing mainly, though, on EU funding. So, a lot of funding sources now are available for EU projects. There's Erasmus+. I know Tempus is now finished, but Erasmus+ is continuing. We do have Horizon 2020. There will also be opportunities with IPA 2 funding for some projects and aspects of science. So there are a range of funding opportunities from the EU available. And I'm going to be talking about aspects of the philosophy which are relevant for every project proposal. So it doesn't matter what the subject area is. It doesn't matter what the funding source is. It doesn't matter what the particular program is within the funding source. It's your philosophy that you've got to implement within every project proposal that you write. And this is a philosophy that will help you to make sure that your proposal gets, if not at the top, but at least sufficiently high up the ranking for it to be selected for funding. So you should aim to master the philosophy for success. Now, some of you may know that I've written a guide, which I update every so often, on secrets to success for writing project proposals. This is available from me as a PDF file if anybody would like to have it. So anybody who is seriously thinking about putting together their ideas for a project proposal, I'd be happy to send you this after the course. And maybe, Dushan, if they give you a list of their requirements and their names, then you can pass it on to me as a single file, email or... Oh, I could send it to you and then you could distribute it to them. Yeah, okay. Right. So that's about 30-something pages of advice. Now, your philosophy is to know how to be competitive. Many scientists, we tend to be modest. We don't like to exert ourselves. We don't like to say that it's definitely this. We like to be cautious. And therefore, many scientists find it difficult to know what to do to be competitive. Because when it comes to money for projects, very often it's only the project proposal that gets at the very top of the list that will get the money. It doesn't say they're there. But in Framework Programme 7 and also in Horizon 2020, for many of their funding schemes, they would fund only one project proposal. I wrote a project proposal for FP7 in 2009, and it came third. And I got no money. So in the Olympic Games, I would have got the bronze medal and been very happy. I can take a medal home. But for Horizon 2020 and FP7, I go home with nothing. You see, and I spent several weeks, several months of my life putting that together. And you don't want to go through the frustration yourselves of putting a lot of effort into writing project proposals to find that yours are coming third and not getting the money. So what I'm going to be talking about is the way that you should be thinking when putting together the information for your project proposals to make sure that you are competitive. And you're sufficiently competitive for your proposal to be the best. The one that gets to the top The one that gets the gold medal, which means you get the money. So you've got to learn how to compete to beat the rest of them. And to be competitive, to beat the rest, you've got to make sure that your proposal is the best that the evaluators are going to be reading. So only if you can convince the funding source that your proposal is the best, do you have a good chance of being able to get, well, you have an almost certain chance of getting the money. Although even two proposals with the same score of 15 out of 15 for Framework Programme 7, on some occasions only one was funded. So even a perfect score of 15 out of 15 does not always guarantee that you get the money. So your philosophy is to know what you have to do to make your proposal the best. So I'm going to be talking for the next few minutes on how you make sure that your proposal is the best that the evaluators are going to see. And because I'm a very visual sort of person to take in information, I've put together the next two slides to illustrate for you visually what you need to be targeting when you're writing your project proposals. So here's the first slide. So can somebody describe for me what you can see in that slide inside the yellow box? Well, actually, I've used it before, haven't I, in one of the earlier presentations. You see, it has got that word magla. It's got that degree of uncertainty. So this would be typical of a proposal that's not going to get the money. And if I show you the next slide, you can see the difference between the two bars. This slide now has clearly defined bars. It has a clearly defined first bar on the left and a clearly defined second bar on the right. And it now has a clearly defined ladder, stepenica, joining those two bars. Now that, in graphic format, is what a proposal is going to look like. And I should be showing you a slide in a few minutes' time, which takes that basic structure and I add to it all the components that make up a typical project proposal, so that you can see how they all fit together. So that's effectively what you should be targeting your proposal to look like. No fog, no magla. Right? And that's not easy. It's a challenge. Now I need to give you some background information on, particularly for EU funding sources, you need to understand why people in the Commission in Brussels or wherever it's managed, why they want to give money to you. They're not wanting to give money to you because they like you. They're wanting to give money to you because you satisfy their requirements for what they want. So if I go round that triangle, we start off with the EU politicians who sit in their nice expensive offices in Brussels or Strasbourg or whatever it is, Luxembourg. And they develop policy. They decide what is good for Europe. So they will develop EU policy. EU policy is implemented through the European Commission, which is based in Brussels. So that's why you keep hearing about Brussels. Everything centralizes on Brussels. That's where the European Commission sits, and they implement European policy, and part of that policy will be implemented through EU funding programs. In the past, it was implemented through Tempus, FP7, COST. COST is still going in the new funding scheme. We now have Horizon 2020, and Tempus has been replaced by Erasmus+. And there are many other funding schemes for culture and aspects of business and commerce, etc. So those EU funding programs are supposed to be providing the implementation of that EU policy. So those funding programs will have beneficiaries. Beneficiaries who are either direct beneficiaries of the funding program or who are secondary beneficiaries because they're part of society. And the funding programs in general are targeting improvement in society, improving, getting rid of our problems, societal challenges, improving competitiveness, improving jobs, providing opportunities for growth. So funding schemes are contributing to that. And they need to have impact so that the EU politicians see that their EU policies are being implemented. And when I talk about impact, this is actually the key word in that circle. It's really impact. They want to see good impact, significant impact at the level of Europe. So those funding programs could be ones that you're wanting to get the money from for a cost project, Erasmus Plus or Horizon 2020, for example. So there's your project. You want to get the money from one of those funding programs, and your project will have its own impact for your specific project. But you have to be aware that your impact has got to contribute to their impact. Impact at the European level. And if you don't write that into your proposal, if you don't convince the evaluators that you will genuinely have impact at the EU level, then it's quite likely that you won't get the money. So this is a major criterion that you need to be thinking about, and it is a major criterion that the evaluators will be using to evaluate your proposal. To what extent will your project have an impact on all the various stakeholders around Europe? So that's something important for you to be thinking about. Now I come back to those figures that I showed you earlier. As you've probably worked out, this is the figure illustrating a proposal that's going to fail, where now the vertical axis is a measure of the impact that your project is going to have. If you have fog in either of those bars, then you can't quantify easily the impact that your project is going to have. So that's one that won't get the money, and that's what 90% of project proposals look like, because they don't get the money. You need to make sure that your proposal looks like the one shown here. Where you have clearly identified where you are starting from. You have got activities clearly described in sufficient detail to be able to identify where you will get to. And those activities are indicated by the red steps going up between the bars. And if you are successful at describing that, then that's what a proposal will look like that gets the money. Now, it's not just as simple as that. Unfortunately, there are two other criteria that you will need to consider for certain types of project proposal. The first one is going to be true for all project proposals. It is not just impact, but it's impact per unit cost. Because if there are two proposals which claim to achieve the same impact, and one proposal is 20% more expensive than the other, the one that gets the money is the one that's cheaper. So it means that you've got to be very careful in working out all of your costs. Your budget figures have got to be realistic. And in fact, even on this project here, the Tempest project, we had some of our budget cut slightly, because the evaluators, the Tempest office, thought that certain aspects were over budgeted. So this business about making it cost effective is very true. You really have got to think very carefully that all of your activities are justified and the cost of those activities are well justified as well. So that's one extra criterion you need to think about. And the other one is specific for research projects. Because you've got another criterion to think about in terms of research, and that is that your research has got to be world class. The EU will not fund poor quality research. So you need to know that your research genuinely is competitive with the best in Europe. Now, when I say your research, I don't necessarily mean you as individuals, but I mean the consortium, the team that you've put together to work on this particular project. The team as a whole has got to be doing European class, world class quality research. Otherwise, you don't get the money. So, how do you get rid of the fog in the bars? And this is the slide where I said that I'm going to expand on what goes into those two bars to help to quantify those two bars and get rid of the fog. So this is our starting point. And you've got to get rid first of the fog on the left-hand bar, the shorter one, because you've got to know where you're starting from. So you start by describing the inputs that go into the research that you plan to carry out, assuming that it is going to be a research project. So you need to describe a needs analysis, that the work is needed. The state of the art, what is currently out there, not just in Serbia, not just in Vojvodina, but around Europe. How will what you plan to do compare with the best research groups out there in the rest of Europe? If it's not competitive with them, then you probably won't get the money. Partner justification. You've got to justify that every partner is in your consortium for a reason. They have to be complementary and not just because they're your friends that you've worked with over the years. There has to be a justified reason for including them. Existing excellence. They will not fund poor quality. So you have to demonstrate that you can work at a level of excellence which matches the best in Europe. Existing capacity. You've got to demonstrate that you have the capacity to do what you plan to do. You have to demonstrate that you have some existing resources that you can use as a baseline upon which to build the activities for your project into the future. And you also need to identify, where possible, a previous track record of taking part in similar projects. So that will help you to define the size of the first bar. Now, once you know where you're starting from, with that left-hand bar now clearly defined, that allows you to identify realistic objectives. Because we know this is the way things are at the moment. Now we can plan to move from here up to there. So we can therefore identify objectives that allow us to take the position that we're at now and then move it further into the future. And the further up you can move it, the more the impact is that your project will have. So, having defined the inputs, you can now define the objectives for your project, and that, once you've defined the objectives, that will now help you to remove the fog on the right-hand bar. Because here we have the outputs of your project, which are going to be the funder's expected output, the funder's impact that they want their money to be spent on. There will also be the stakeholders' impact, the people for whom the project is eventually going to benefit. There will also be your project immediate beneficiaries, the people who will get immediate benefit from you doing the work. There will also be sustainability. You're going up here in your project. What happens when the money stops? Oh, does it go back down again? If it doesn't go back down again, you've got to write in the mechanism that will provide for that sustainability, either to carry on going up or at least to maintain where you've got to. So that has to be written in somewhere in your proposal. Value for money has also got to be written in, because if your project is too expensive, it won't get funded. And publicity is also important. If nobody knows what you're doing, if nobody knows how you're spending their money, they're not likely to be interested in giving you the money, because they don't want the money to disappear into what might appear to be just a black hole. Lots of scientists doing little bits of experiments and then publishing it in scientific papers. They need to make sure that you provide the publicity to disseminate your progress to the rest of the community. So all of those contribute to defining the outputs. And once you know what the outputs are going to be, you're now able to see what is the difference between inputs and outputs. And that tells you what activities you have to do, because your project is activities. So once you know where you're getting to, you can then work out the activities that you need to carry out. And the activities will be both a combination of new resources. You may have to buy equipment, or you may have to re-equip a laboratory to be able to do the work. And you will have a series of activities, some of them lasting only a few days, some of them lasting months. And those will be the steps in your ladder to get to the end point. So put all that together, and that effectively is your project proposal. Now, the way that I've presented it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the way that you write it when you write your project proposal. Because usually you will have to they have little boxes, or maybe big boxes, where you have to describe specific aspects of your project. So they may ask you to provide state-of-the-art. So state-of-the-art is a box that you fill in. They may also have evidence of existing capacity and resources, but that might be in a different part of the proposal. But effectively, everything that I've put in that slide has got to go somewhere into your proposal to get rid of the fog, to remove magla.